United.
Paul's always first.
Thank you for your record. My name is Paul Gilbert, 701 North 44th Street. I apologize at the beginning for my hubris in putting myself first. However, there was some pragmatic considerations in that. I think we can shorten our time together if I could clarify several issues at the outset, and therefore, with the permission of my constituents, I admit it. And I would like to know, on other zoning hearings, may I also request to be first, Mr. Mayor? I just wondered if that was a possibility. So
We will take that on a case-by-case basis.
all right, fine, thank you. I represent the Chinese United Association of Greater Phoenix. I'm very proud to represent this group, and they are very passionate, as our district representative has indicated in her prefatory remarks about this issue. The Chinese Cultural Center is a vital and important project for them. It is part of their community, and they are very, very interested in seeing that it is preserved. Let me just begin by saying that a few general comments about why this is of such vital importance to the Chinese American community and simultaneously the city of Phoenix. As with the case in many historic preservation items, it's as important to Phoenix as it is to the people that are directly involved. Such is clearly the case here. The Chinese Cultural Center provides inspiration to the Chinese community. It is a place of religious observance. It is a reflection of the Chinese community's contribution to Phoenix. It displays Chinese architecture and methods of construction not seen in many places outside of China itself. Importantly, it provides an educational forum for thousands of students. It is a place of gathering for the Chinese community. We hold festivals, holidays, historical events, weddings, and a plethora of other activities that are very integral to and important to the Chinese community. There is no question that the Chinese Cultural Center has become an iconic landmark that brings recognition to Phoenix's commitment to diversity. I think this is vindicated most powerfully and empirically by the fact that the mayor and members of the council, I may be off a little bit, but we have close to 200 people here who are attending on behalf of the Chinese community. So it's of vital importance to us. I think you're aware of that. Pardon me for reviewing with you just briefly some of the reasons why it is so important. Now, one thing, thank you for clarifying, Mayor. We got very confused, and I didn't get here early enough. I told everybody to mark that they were in favor, but apparently it was interpreted that if you marked in favor, you were in favor of the staff report for denial. I thought that marking it in favor meant we were in favor of the petition. So
For purposes of the record, your interpretation will be utilized, and so in favor means in favor of, I guess, the motion made by Councilman Gallego, assuming you're in favor of that. We're going to get to that point.
I am.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience. We'll get to that with some dispatch. But unfortunately, I didn't talk to everyone, so some marked that they were against because they were told differently. I think you can safely assume that 99% of the cards that have been filled out by the 200 people that are here are in support of the motion articulated by Councilman Gallego. Thank you, Mayor. That was spontaneous. I didn't ask for that, just for the record. All right.
Mr. Gilbert usually does not get applause at zoning hearings.
I know. It is, and I must say, I'm basking in the enjoyment. So thank you very much. Thank you. All right. I'd like to clarify our petition request. I admit that perhaps it was not as clear as it could have been when the initial petition was filed with the city. But I want to clarify what our petition request is, and then also briefly, Mayor, to discuss the zoning on the property, because as we reason together, I think it's of vital importance that we focus on the current zoning, given the reference from the staff report. So, our goal is we would eventually like to achieve a finding through the historic preservation process of a determination of exceptional importance for the Chinese Cultural Center. That's what this is all about. This is what hopefully this motion will lead to. It doesn't have to happen, we understand that. But in visiting with Michelle Dodge, who has been very helpful, she gave us some very good advice. She indicated in conversations and in a memo to me that our request for consideration of historic preservation was still lacking in what she calls the broader context, and that the city did not have sufficient context to make a determination as to whether the property qualified for the exceptional significance category. The survey that was done, and I believe the title of that is the Asian Community American Historic Property Survey, for convenience purposes, I'll just call it the survey, was done and involved the Asian community, but it stopped in 1960. The Cultural Center wasn't built until beginning of 1997, so obviously that survey didn't include our property. Michelle indicated then that if we really wanted to give them the tools that they needed to analyze to see whether we qualified for historic preservation, that we needed to update that survey. That is what we're all about. So we're asking today, consistent with the motion that is made, is that you instruct your staff to pursue the survey and to provide the context so there can be a full review and a complete review to determine whether this property is worthy of the exceptional importance designation for historic preservation. Now, I'd like to also briefly touch on perhaps a more delicate subject, and that is, we're very concerned, and I'm not casting stones on the owner of the property. We say on the record and we commit that we want to sit down and work with them. They have made us an offer. Frankly, it came in the form of a press release, so we didn't understand it to be an offer. But we're willing to sit down and work with them, and we want to do that. Our concern is what happens in the interim. If this survey is taking place and an analysis is being done to put the Cultural Center in proper context, to use the words of Michelle Dodge, we're hurting in a very obvious way that if True North proceeds to demolish any of the building, we don't have the authority right now to stop him from doing that, and we're not asking the City Council for some type of specific mandate from the Council to stop the demolition, but we are hopeful that you might be willing as a City Council to give a word of encouragement to True North, the owner of the property, to let the historic preservation process go forth and to not demolish or close down the Chinese garden during the period of time that this historic preservation activity is taking place. Now, lastly, I want to talk just briefly about the zoning. We do take some solace in the current restrictions on the zoning on the subject property. Some of you were on the council when it came before you. You know it was sold to you on the basis of being a Chinese cultural center. So the minutes talk about that. But more importantly, because it's the stipulations, as we all know, not being pedantic here, that guides our process here. And these stipulations were reaffirmed in 2007 by the City Council. Importantly, a site plan was stipulated for the Chinese Cultural Center. And that site plan clearly denotes buildings, the gardens, and the circulation. The stipulation specifically says that the development has to be in general conformance to that site plan. And interestingly, which is unusual for a zoning case, in this case, the stipulation specifically says if you're going to amend that site plan, you got to come back and have a hearing before the Planning Commission. So we wish to put on the record as a reminder to all within my ear today that there is a stipulation that says you've got to comply with the site plan. If you're going to change it, you got to come back and have a public hearing before the Planning Commission. We thank you very much for your attention, and we hope that you take cognizance of the importance of this cultural center to the Chinese community. We appreciate the motion, and we're looking forward to working with the city on this project and going forward.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Next speaker.
Mayor, can we
You have a question, sir?
questions, or can we let-
You have a question?
just about the stipulation, is that true, or?
Mayor, Councilman Nowakowski, there are stipulations in place for this project. Mr. Gilbert is correct. There's a general conformance stipulation as well as a stipulation that does require the Planning Commission to hear something if they wish to amend the stipulations. So there's an element that is built in that would require a public hearing, but there are also property rights associated with that existing general conformance site plan that the city wouldn't be able to stop and wouldn't have rights to review if they stayed within that general conformance. So for example, if they were to take out some of the roof tiles and those things, that's not part of that site plan, and they would be permitted to do that and still be in conformance with the general conformance requirement of the site plan. So I just want to make that clear on the record that there's some protection, but it's not as much as some in the community may like.
But now the gardens would be protected, right?
So Mayor, Councilman Nowakowski, there is a stipulation for gardens on there, but it doesn't say what type of garden has to be in there in terms of the materials and those things that would be in the garden. So as long as they had some type of garden, and the zoning ordinance does allow for 10% flexibility related to general conformance, and as such, staff would have to make an interpretation with that 10% flexibility as that garden changed.
As I read some of the minutes in the past, it was sold to us as a Chinese cultural center with a Chinese garden. So would it include a Chinese garden?
Mayor, members of council, that is certainly something that staff would bring up and try and talk with an applicant about. But as you know from your prior dealings on these things, what matters is what do the legal stipulations say at the end of the day. And it doesn't say general conformance with a garden with specific regard to Chinese cultural elements, artwork. Those things aren't in there. And so staff would not have as good of a tool to require those to be in place.
Mayor, I'd like to ask Mr. Gilbert his opinion on that.
All right, Mr. Gilbert, I'm assuming you have a different opinion.
Your assumption is correct, Mayor and Councilman Nowakowski. The stipulation says general conformance with the site plan. That site plan shows the Chinese garden in exactly the configuration it is now. And the word garden is written on there, and there's a circumference and a boundary all the way around. I submit that you cannot change that garden absolutely without violating that general conformance standard, and hence it requires a hearing before the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, do any other members have a question for Mr. Gilbert or staff? We got a lot of cards to get through. Councilwoman Stark, please.
Mr. Gilbert, if you, I've always wanted to quiz Mr. Gilbert.
I'm flattered.
So I just want you, if they want to do, let's say, a tenant improvement, would you be opposed to that? Because my understanding is they may have already applied for a tenant improvement, maybe I'm wrong. That is internal to the building. What if they've already moved on that? I'm just concerned.
Yes. Mayor and Councilwoman Stark, we are cognizant of the fact that the site plan stipulation basically doesn't control the internal part of the building. So we have no legal remedy to prohibit them from doing that. Only if they change the site plan does the zoning stipulation apply. Sure.
Councilman Zisi, you have a question for Mr. Gilbert or for staff on this issue?
I do, and this goes back to the site plan. And before I get into that, I'd like to tell you your attorney does an amazing job up here. I mean, he presents an argument that's very strong. I was here in the 90s and actually negotiated this agreement. So even though it may not
You're
say
the one to
Chinese
blame.
garden, no, but it was very clear when we did these negotiations. I want to make this clear to staff and to Mr. Gilbert. It was extremely clear what was supposed to be happening here. It was complicated at the time because you had the Taiwanese community, then you had the mainland Chinese community actually came together and worked together back then. And it was spectacular. It was beautiful, and that's what this was. It was a commitment that was made. If you look at the commitment that the Chinese community has made, the Asian community, and primarily the Chinese community to Phoenix, it's extremely significant. Likewise, the city of Phoenix made a commitment back in the 90s when we negotiated this agreement that this is what it was going to be. So when we look at this, when we look at general conformance, and it does say garden in there, it may not say the word Chinese garden in there, but I think everybody understood what it meant back in the 90s because I was here when we approved this agreement. Like I said, it was complicated, and we went through that. So from my end of it, I know this is going to have to come back, and I'm going to give an encouragement to everybody to work together, as you had suggested, Mr. Gilbert. I'm going to see this as an affront and a problem if the developer comes in there, wants to demolish the building, take away a lot of those items and those areas that are very unique to the Chinese community in the building. They may feel that they can do that, but it's going to be a problem when they come through, at least from my end, when they have to come through and want to change that site plan, because that's what they're going to need to do. The other part of it is, and I think you need to drill this home, is that there are artifacts, there are things unique to that building that there are nowhere else in the valley or in the state. I mean, anywhere else, quite frankly. They came in from China, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
A lot of that was shipped in.
Correct.
So, I mean, when we look at the survey, I'd like to make sure staff, I assume we're going to be doing it, but you're paying for it, correct? Or how's this working?
In concept, we are. We found out just how much it cost, so took our breath away, so we're working on
I
that.
just want to make sure.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I want to make sure we have clarity on that. But to staff, there are going to be items that the building itself may not be hit the 50-year mark, but there will be items and material on that site that will be over 50 years old. We're talking about so that alone, my children are from China, just so you know. They're beautiful. They're outstanding girls, but and they are really outstanding. But I want to make sure that we take a look, and when we do the survey also identifies each of those artifacts that could be over that age period. I want to make sure that staff looks at the site plan, what was approved back in the 90s, reaffirmed back in 2007. When we talk about general conformity, that garden is there. Like I said, it may not say Chinese garden, but it's pretty clear what we meant. And if anyone, I mean, I know what we meant because I negotiated this building. And so I want to make sure that we include all that. Is there anything else we need, Mr. Gilbert?
No, I would just supplement that by saying there's also another stipulation that I didn't have time to talk about where they have to get permission from the Arts Commission.
That's true.
And much of the statuaries that are there were done in connection with the Arts Commission. So they satisfied the Art Commission by putting the Chinese art there, and that's another stipulation that they were required to comply with.
Good point.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Thank you very much. Does any other council member have a question for Mr. Gilbert? All right. typically this is a unique matter because it came up as citizen petition, but it is a zoning matter. Normally, we do give the lawyer for an applicant and the other side additional time